everyone, welcome to Give Your Grades a Glow Up. Today we're going to be looking at a poem from the Power and Conflict cluster. We're going to be looking at The Charge of the Light Brigade by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Imagine having Lord in your name. It's actually the same guy who wrote the unseen poem we did in lesson 2, who wrote The Eagle. Tennyson wrote The Charge of the Light Brigade after one of the most famous battles of the Crimean War. So during the fighting, the soldiers were listening to instructions of what to do next, and someone made a mistake. So they either misheard the order or a wrong order was given, and it was telling all the soldiers to charge forward into an area that was already filled with Russian troops who were ready to attack. So this mistake led to 600 British soldiers of the Light Brigade charging into a valley surrounded by Russian cannons. So essentially they were like running into their suicide, but they did it. They knew what they were running into. They could see they were running into an area where the Russians were ready to attack them, but they still did it. And many of the Light Brigade died. So in this poem, Tennyson praises the soldiers instead of focusing on anger towards the commanders whose mistake led to their deaths. Because loads of the news outlets at the time were focusing on, there was a mistake, there was this big blunder. And he was like, no, let's give these soldiers the tribute that they deserve. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward. All in the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the Light Brigade, charge for the guns, he said. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the Light Brigade. Was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered. Stormed at with shot and shell, boldly they rode and well. Into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell, rode the 600. Flashed all their sabres bare, flashed as they turned in air, sabering the gunners there, charging an army while all the world wondered. Plunged in the battery smoke, right through the line they broke. Cossack and Russian reeled from the sabre stroke, shattered and sundered. Then they rode back, but not the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon behind them, volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell, while horse and hero fell. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell. All that was left of them, left of 600. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made. All the world wondered. Honour the charge they made. Honour the Light Brigade. Noble 600. We're going to go through this poem and we are going to try and figure out what's happening in each stanza, and then we're going to try and select 3 juicy quotations at least. And by juicy quotations, I mean a quotation that's got interesting language devices, words that we can zoom into, so that if this poem comes up in your exam, you have things to analyse and you have things to say about it. Let's get started. So the poem starts, half a league, half a league. A league is 3 miles, so half a league is 1.5 miles, and that's essentially the distance they're being asked to go. And there's repetition, half a league, which creates a rhythm, which enhances the feeling of galloping horses. And it says, all in the valley of death rode the 600. I think this, you can mind map and analyze this quotation. You can write about it in your exam. Firstly, it's a hyperbolic metaphor, valley of death, because it's not really a valley, so it emphasizes their bravery. A valley is somewhere where things grow. So Tennyson beautifies the death of the soldiers. And that phrase, valley of death, actually refers to the Bible in Psalm 23, when it says, the valley of the shadow of death. So by using this biblical allusion, which would have been very familiar to his audience at the time, Tennyson elevates the soldiers as if they transcend humanity, and also elevates the event that they were in, the battle, to great importance. He's using this biblical reference, religious imagery. He's showing how important this event was. Also, as an alternative interpretation, maybe the biblical allusion shows that soldiers feel a sense of comfort knowing that God is with them. And then we could reinforce this idea structurally, because we love to reinforce structurally wherever we can. And we say this phrase, valley of death, is repeated throughout the poem. So it's almost like a constant reminder of the deadly nature of the battle and the bravery of the soldiers. When it says all, it creates this sense of unity and comradeship of the soldiers. And then it refers to them as 600. So they are identified by their military roles. Maybe that's an implicit criticism from Tennyson in the whole poem. So he's not really angry, but he is criticizing and saying the soldiers were denied any individual identity. They were just seen as the 600, and that's not what it should be like. Then it goes on to say, forward the Light Brigade, charge for the guns, he said. So basically that's when they're receiving the order, and there's all these imperatives saying, forward, because they're forced to obey. And there's an exclamative which shows the authority. And it says, into the valley of death rode the 600. It's like the soldiers immediately responded. There is no hesitation. It's forward, we got the imperative, and then it's into the valley of death. So they didn't hesitate, they went straight forward. The next stanza, it says, forward the Light Brigade, was there a man dismayed? There's a rhetorical question. He's saying, was anyone disappointed? Was anyone dismayed? And obviously anyone would be. Anyone would be disappointed and dismayed if they received an incorrect order and they're about to run into their death. But then Tennyson immediately answers and says, no, they weren't. They completed their duty. He says, not, though the soldiers knew someone had blundered. Blundered means made a mistake. So Tennyson is raising awareness of the poor leadership, blundered, and he's saying it's not that soldiers didn't know, they knew someone had blundered. But even though they knew the order was wrong, they still did it. They still charged, they still went forward. He's admiring their courage and their professionalism. And he says, theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why. They're not going to question it. They just have to follow the orders. Theirs but to do and die. There's dental plosive alliteration here. Do and die. Duh, duh. It's a really hard sound. Duh. Highlighting the soldiers' determination and their unwavering heroism. And then repeats that metaphor. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Next stanza, where it says, cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them. Do you see every sentence starts with cannon? That's called anaphora. The sentences, consecutive, next to each other, start in the same way. And the fact that there's cannon here, cannon there, cannon everywhere, shows they're surrounded, they're trapped. Every time it repeats, it's like it's mimicking the relentless attack. Cannon from here, cannon from here, cannon from here. And the prepositions are what I find most interesting. You know, it's saying cannon to the right, to the left, and in front. So there's no cannon behind them. They could run back, but they don't. They could decide, nah mate, turn around, gallop away, but they don't. And it says, volleyed and thundered, stormed out with shot and shell. I actually think you should analyse that quotation. Volleyed and thundered is onomatopoeic. It evokes the reader's senses. They're almost sound words, volleyed and thundered. You can hear the violence that's surrounding them. Volleyed, something volleyed, it shows the attack was incessant. It's like unstoppable. And thundered, what's thunder like? Thunder connotes destruction. There's pathetic fallacy in thundered and stormed. That means the weather is reflecting the mood. And almost by using words like storm and thunder, weather words, it's saying they can't win because they're fighting against something inevitable and natural and something that is far superior to human strength. And we can then zoom in further because we're aiming for a high level, so we want to say as many interesting things about this quotation as we can. We can go in further and look at the sibilants in stormed at with shot and shell. The creates a really sinister tone, like it's a really vicious and frightening attack. Or it's like mimics the hissing sound of the warfare. Or, let me give you another interpretation for my grade 9ers out there. Maybe we could say something clever like, the sibilance creates this soft sound, so it shows that even when they are facing this danger, they're not fazed by it, they're calm. And then that juxtaposes with the next line. Boldly they rode and well. So despite the danger, not only do they ride and continue to fight, but they do it boldly. We're going to mind map the next bit. We're going to analyze the next bit where it says into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell. There's animal imagery here because jaws, that makes the battle seem really brutal and really ferocious, like an animal with jaws. And it shows that their death is callous and inhumane. It's not a human death. This is like animalistic, what's happening out there. So again, maybe that's a subtle criticism by Tennyson of the Russian enemies. He's describing them as savage. And the metaphor jaws of death makes it seem like death is unavoidable and makes the death seem really painful. You know where it also says mouth? If you imagine something in your mouth, it's like they're being consumed by all the violence around them. They're trapped in it. And we have the religious imagery of hell, which makes the battle seem like a punishment and literally recreates a sense of the stifling heat like hell. Then it says rode the 600. Okay, next stanza. It says, flashed all their sabres bare, charging an army while all the world wondered. Now there's a real contrast here between the active verbs, flash their sabres, linked to the soldiers' military skills, and the passive nature of the people at home who can only sit and wonder. The alliteration of W here highlights the confusion and the shock of the people back home. The alliteration of W, the what? Like those question words start with W. It shows their confusion sitting at home, and it serves to cement the soldiers as valiant, because ordinary people could never be in the position that they're in with the same level of courage. And then it describes them fighting. So it says, despite the obstacles like the battery smoke, they still broke the line. That's a huge achievement in itself. They've still broken through the line, even though they've got all this smoke all around them. And Tennyson says, then they rode back, but not the 600. The next stanza repeats cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, but this time it mentions cannon behind them, which means the focus is on the returning heroes. It says, while horse and hero fell. Fell is a euphemism. They died. They didn't just fall, they died. But he doesn't want to say they died. Tennyson intentionally avoids using negative description to give the soldiers dignity in their death. And the alliteration, horse and hero, that alliteration of H sounds like a sigh. It's like a reflective tone. Sadness. That alliteration also links the horse and the hero together. Maybe that's saying people were treated like animals and there's no distinction in between them. So once again, it's like an implicit criticism. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell, all that was left of them, the 600. In the last stanza, Tennyson's passion is really clear. He is still suggesting that despite all of this, it is honourable to die for your country. This is very different from the poem Exposure and Owen's message. Tennyson asked the question, when can their glory fade? And after the 5 previous stanzas, the answer to his question is pretty clear. He's saying their glory should never fade, because their sacrifice is symbolic of all those soldiers who lay down their lives for their country. And then he says, oh, the wild charge they made. And that's an interjection. You know, when he says, oh, it's called an interjection. And it's like his disbelief, at their incredible selflessness and his reverence, his respect for the soldiers. There's an exclamation mark which enhances the passion in his voice, because he encourages everyone to join in and give the soldiers the send-off that he believes they deserve. And then he uses imperatives and says to the reader, honor the charge they made. He's telling you, do it, honor them, honor the Light Brigade. And the command at the end of the poem leaves the reader in little doubt what Tennyson wants them to take away from the poem. The poem is a tribute to someone who has passed away, and that is called an elegy. He ends with a stanza praising the undying glory and honor of the Noble 600, the soldiers of the Light Brigade. And that is reinforced structurally, actually, because if you look, there are 6 stanzas, and it's as if each stanza is a memorial stone to 100 of the 600 cavalrymen. And that's it. That's an analysis of the poem with language and structure. Context and poet's message has to be included within your essay. So you need to explain what was going on during the time the poem was written, and therefore what message was the poet trying to give the reader. So some interesting context points for the charge of the Light Brigade are: the most significant moment in the Crimean War came during the Battle of Balaclava. Okay, that's what this was called, the Battle of Balaclava. An order was given to the British Army's cavalry division, known as the Light Brigade, and that was misunderstood, and over 600 cavalrymen charged down a narrow valley straight into the fire of Russian cannons. And the news of this disaster quickly made it back to Britain. The Crimean War was the first war where newspapers carried eyewitness reports, talking about not just the triumphs of war, but the mistakes and the horrors, the things that went wrong as well. So there was a Times correspondent called William Howard Russell, and he used modern technology, it was an electric telegraph, to send dispatches from the front line. He would report what's happening there at the war. And before, they couldn't do that. They didn't have the technology back in the day. So his reports caught the attention of the public and inspired individuals to set out for the war zone and help suffering soldiers. So people like Florence Nightingale, Mary Seacole, they were all like hearing of what was happening at war, and they wanted to go out and help. So at home, news of the disaster was a sensation, because people were like, what? Did this really happen? We didn't realize war was like this. And the news led to the first serious questioning of decisions made by commanders and the consequences for soldiers. So there was anger towards the commanders, contrasting with an appreciation of the bravery and sacrifice of the ordinary soldiers. Tennyson therefore wrote the Charge of the Light Brigade in response to all the media outrage. Because it's written in the form of a ballad, it appeals to people who are not able to read to a really high level. Tennyson wanted people to remember the soldiers and what they did, and that's why it has such a strong rhythm. He wanted to shift the discourse, shift the conversation, and redirect everyone's focus away from the blunder. Like, let's not focus on the blunder, on the mistake, and let's focus on the soldiers. Otherwise, their death was in vain. What was the point of them dying if we're not going to remember their bravery? And there you have it, a full analysis of another anthology poem. I hope you found the video helpful. If you did, please do give it a like, and don't forget to check out all the other extremely helpful videos in this series.